It started like a quiet storm. CNN and BBC flashed the same headline across the globe. Donald Trump to debate. Captain Ibrahim Traoré on U.S.-Africa policy. Live. Most people thought it was a mistake. Why would a U.S. president agree to debate a young African captain? Why would the U.S. media give him that stage? But Traoré didn't flinch. He boarded the flight to Washington with one small bag, no entourage, and a heart heavy with duty. Not pride, duty. He knew he wasn't just representing Burkina Faso. He was carrying the faces of miners without helmets, mothers without clinics, farmers without rain, and children learning under trees. As the plane touched down at Dulles Airport, protesters waved signs outside. Some read, "He's not welcome here." Others read, "Speak for Africa, Captain." Inside a luxury Washington hotel, Donald Trump rehearsed. Cameras were everywhere. His team prepared zingers, jabs, and applause lines. But Traoré didn't rehearse. He prayed. Then he wrote a single line on a folded paper and placed it in his jacket. The stage was set. Something was about to happen that the world would never forget. The stage lights beamed like suns. Red, white, and blue surrounded the studio. Digital flags, LED backdrops, an American eagle spinning on the floor. Every camera angle was prepped for drama. Ibrahim Traoré stood quietly behind his podium, eyes lowered, hands folded. Across from him, Donald Trump leaned back confidently, scanning the room, waiting for his moment. Producers whispered into earpieces. A countdown blinked on screen. 10, 9, 8. Journalists filled the front rows. Some smirked. Others rolled their eyes. A few African reporters clutched their notepads tighter, hoping this wouldn't end in embarrassment. A boy in Ghana was watching from his uncle's phone. A mother in Nigeria streamed it while cooking. A teacher in Congo paused her lesson and turned on the classroom TV. Then the debate began. The first question was soft. "Captain Traoré, what do you want from the West?" He raised his head slowly, his voice calm, clear, but heavy. "I don't want charity. I want you to stop stealing what's not yours." The room paused. Then Trump laughed. The crowd followed. But Traoré didn't blink. He was waiting, listening. He knew something darker was coming, and it did. Trump leaned into the microphone, voice dripping with mockery. "Ladies and gentlemen, look. This is the kind of leader Africa sends." Laughter. Applause. Even some African-American studio guests shifted uncomfortably. He continued. "Military jackets, no economy, no democracy, no Starbucks. They think standing at a podium makes them powerful." Cameras zoomed in on Traoré's face, calm, still. Then Trump delivered the blow. "Burkina Faso. Even the name sounds like a cough." More laughter. But one reporter, an older black man, looked down in shame. He whispered, "This isn't right." Traoré reached into his jacket. He unfolded the small paper he wrote on in the hotel. His hands didn't shake. He held it in front of him, then looked at the audience. Not at Trump, at the world. Then softly, "I did not come to be liked. I came to be heard. My people dig up the gold that runs your banks and still die barefoot in dust. Who are you to laugh?" Silence. Total silence. Even the cameraman's hand trembled slightly. Somewhere, a child watching on YouTube whispered to her mother, "Mom, he's making me cry." This was just the beginning. The studio went completely still. Coughs, shifting feet. No one laughed anymore. Even Trump looked confused. He expected anger, fire, shouting. Instead, Traoré's words fell like calm rain, slow, soft, but cold and soaking. The camera didn't blink, zoomed in, locked on his face. Traoré gently placed the paper back in his pocket, then said quietly, "You ask what Africa wants. We want the chains you left behind. Unbroken. Acknowledged." A producer off-screen whispered, "Cut to Trump." But the director shook his head. No, stay on Traoré. A young woman watching from Atlanta clutched her necklace. Her father came from Burkina Faso. She had never seen her country spoken of like this, with power, with pain. On the screen, Trump adjusted his mic, but before he could speak, Traoré continued. When your companies take our gold, we're told it's business. When we say no, we're called rebels. Is that leadership or theft in a suit? The room shifted again. A MAGA supporter in the crowd looked down. He wasn't ready to feel this. But now, he did. And he wasn't alone. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers or shout. But every word he said felt like a quiet blade, cutting softly, cleanly, without bleeding. Just truth. He turned to face Trump directly now. You said Africa has no Starbucks, but we have beans you roast. You laugh at our schools. But our people built yours and got none of the credit. Trump tried to interrupt, but the moderator gently held up a hand. Please let him finish, sir. That alone made the audience gasp. Even Trump looked thrown off. Somewhere in Ghana, a young student whispered to her friend, "He's fighting without fists." In Paris, an old Burkina man wiped his eyes. He'd waited decades to hear someone say these things on a stage this big. Back in the studio, Traoré paused. Then he looked toward the camera. We are not poor. We are looted. But we remember. And we rise. The crowd didn't cheer. Not yet. Because they were still processing. This wasn't a debate. It was a mirror. And the world wasn't ready for what it saw. The room stayed quiet. But Traoré wasn't finished. He placed both hands on the podium. His voice dropped, soft, almost breaking. My mother was born on dirt. She raised 5 of us. She never learned to write. But every morning she told me, stand like a mountain, even when they throw stones. His voice cracked gently at the end. The audience felt it. Somewhere backstage, a CNN producer teared up but didn't know why. Traoré breathed in, then looked at Trump, not in anger, but as if he were explaining something to a lost man. I didn't come here to argue. I came here to remind you that we are not invisible. That pain has a name, and it speaks. A woman in the audience covered her mouth, holding back sobs. Even Trump's expression softened for a moment. A flicker of doubt, a moment of humanity, and millions watching around the world were frozen. Not because they feared what he'd say next, but because they knew he meant every word. This was no speech. This was a son, speaking for his mother. Back in Burkina Faso, the sky was pink with dust. Traoré's mother sat on a wooden stool in front of her small clay home. She had no electricity, no TV, but her neighbor had a radio. She leaned in to listen. The announcer's voice cracked through the static. Captain Ibrahim Traoré just made the world pause. She closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her chest. In that moment, she didn't see her son in a suit. She saw a barefoot boy chasing goats through dry grass. A boy who skipped meals so his siblings could eat. A boy who once said, "Mama, one day I'll speak where they can't ignore me." Inside the studio in Washington, that promise was being kept. And back in Africa, his mother whispered, "Speak slowly, my son. Let them feel you." In America, viewers leaned forward. Something about Traoré's stillness, his lack of hate, made it harder to look away. Harder to laugh. He wasn't speaking for applause. He was speaking for the invisible. And somehow, everyone watching knew it. The moderator tried to move on. "Next question, Mr. Trump." But Trump raised his hand. He stared at Traoré for a long moment. Then with a strange smirk said, "Tell us, Captain, if Africa is so strong, so smart, why do so many want to leave it?" A wave of tension swept through the crowd. Gasps, awkward laughter, whispers. Traoré didn't move. He didn't blink. He let the silence grow. 10 seconds, 15. Even the moderator looked nervous. Then Traoré leaned toward the mic and said quietly, "Because they want peace, not pity, and because men like you made our rivers run backward." A pause. Then, "You take our doctors and leave our clinics empty. You take our engineers and wonder why the bridges fall. We don't run from Africa. We run from the hands that choke it." A woman in the audience began crying. Not loud, just tears. In a news control room nearby, a young white technician whispered, "This isn't politics. This is a man bleeding truth." And for the first time, Trump didn't respond. He just looked away. Ibrahim Traoré looked down at his hands, hands that had once held rifles, hands that had buried friends, hands that had written letters to grieving mothers. Now they held only a microphone. And yet, he looked stronger than ever. "I didn't come here to argue with a billionaire," he said. "I came here as a son of a continent left to starve in silence." He looked out into the audience. "Do you know what it's like to be told you don't exist unless your resources are needed?" No one answered. To walk past schools without chalk, to sit beside your father's grave and realize he died poor, in a land rich with gold? More tears now. Not just in Africa. Not just in the crowd. Even some of Trump's most loyal supporters were listening differently. Traoré had no script, no team, just grief and memory and a voice, a soldier without a gun. But somehow, in that moment, the entire world was holding its breath, as if waiting for a truth it had spent centuries trying to forget. And he was just getting started. In a small radio station in Nairobi, the phone lines jammed. Listeners called in non-stop. "Did you hear what he said about engineers and clinics?" I cried. I'm crying now. My daughter asked me why no one ever spoke for us like that before. Traoré hadn't finished speaking, but his voice was already echoing across oceans. Clips of the debate flooded social media. One had just gone viral on TikTok. "You take our doctors and leave our clinics empty." Within an hour, millions had watched. Within 2 hours, CNN changed its headline. "Debate turns into history. Traoré's words shake the world." Back in the US, young Black Americans were reacting differently. A university student in Chicago tweeted, "I never knew who he was before tonight, but now I feel like he's speaking for us too." Even journalists on major networks, normally stiff and neutral, fought to keep their voices steady. This wasn't a moment anymore. It was a movement. And the man at the center of it stood calm, humble, and unshaken. Still speaking. Still remembering. Still carrying something the world had buried too long. Somewhere in France, an elderly Burkinabe refugee named Mamadou sat beside his grandson. He didn't speak English, but his grandson was translating Traoré's speech to him, sentence by sentence. At first, the boy's voice was loud and confident. But as the words grew heavier, slower, he started stuttering. Then he stopped. Mamadou looked at him. The boy wiped his eyes. I can't translate the rest. It hurts too much." Mamadou leaned forward and took the boy's hand. Then he stared at the screen. Even without understanding the language, he could see it. He could feel it. Traoré wasn't speaking English. He was speaking pain. A pain the old man knew too well. Colonial boots, empty hospitals, rice stolen at gunpoint. And somehow, all of that was now being told in front of the world. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in truth. A truth that broke translators. A truth that crossed oceans. Traoré wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to heal something that had been bleeding quietly for centuries. And every viewer could feel it. He was telling the story no one else dared to tell. In the front row, a man with a thick beard and a bright red MAGA hat had come to mock. He'd laughed during Trump's jokes. He'd booed when Traoré began to speak. But now, something had shifted. Traoré looked at him, just for a second. "You think I hate America? No, I envy your libraries. I envy your running water. I envy your mothers who live past 60. But I do not envy your forgetting." The MAGA man leaned back, arms crossed, but his eyes were wet. Traoré's voice didn't rise. "We do not hate the West. We hate being forgotten after we dig your gold." The man pulled off his cap. He didn't even know why. He held it in his lap. Next to him, a woman sniffled quietly. Another man whispered, "He's not lying." Even the camera crew stopped moving. Their hands hovered in place, unsure whether to zoom or just listen. This wasn't politics anymore. It was something else. Something that reached deeper than borders or ballots. Something raw, ancient, and honest. Traoré stood alone, but millions stood with him now, hearts cracked open, and still, he hadn't dropped the hardest truth yet. In the studio control room, a 10-year-old boy stood behind his mother, who was operating the lights. He wasn't supposed to be there, but he had nowhere else to go. School had ended early. His mother couldn't afford a sitter. He had been doodling superheroes in a notebook until Traoré started speaking. Now he was frozen. The boy stared through the glass at the stage, not blinking, not talking, just watching. "In Africa," Traoré said, "a boy like me carries water at 5, fights hunger at 7, and learns silence by 9. The boy clutched his pencil. Traoré wasn't reading from a script. He was reading from wounds. I was that boy. I didn't know what a playground looked like. I knew only dust, loss, and waiting for lights that never came on. The boy whispered, "Why does this hurt?" His mother turned to him, tears in her eyes. She had no answer. On stage, Traoré looked straight into the camera. "The world thinks children in my land don't dream. But we do. We just dream quieter, because no one ever asked us to speak." The boy in the booth didn't doodle anymore. He just listened. Trump shifted in his chair. His hands twitched. This wasn't the debate he planned. No zingers. No applause lines. No winning. Just a man telling the truth so raw, it left no room for comebacks. "Your towers are tall," Traoré said, "but we built your bricks. Your phones are fast, but our coltan bleeds from child hands. You speak of democracy, but where was it when your bombs landed and we never got a vote?" Trump opened his mouth, closed it. His team behind the camera made desperate gestures. "Say something," they mouthed. But he didn't. He couldn't. For the first time in a long time, Donald Trump had nothing to say. Because what could he say to a man who wasn't attacking, but revealing? And millions watched it happen. Not just Americans, Africans, Asians, Europeans, Latin Americans. Even those who didn't like Traoré started respecting him. He hadn't embarrassed Trump. He had exposed the truth, not with insults, not with pride, but with pain wrapped in dignity. And as the cameras zoomed in on Trump's blank stare, the world saw something no one expected. They saw a man who had finally looked away. In a small clinic in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, a nurse stood near a radio. Her hands were trembling. A child with a fever lay nearby, waiting for treatment. But they had run out of antibiotics, again. The nurse had seen more death than joy in that clinic. And yet, she stood frozen now, listening to Traoré's voice through the crackling speaker. "My people do not ask for miracles," he said. "They ask for dignity, a syringe that works, a hospital with a roof, a mother who doesn't die because a doctor never came." The nurse slowly sat down. Then, she wept. Not because of what he said, but because someone finally said it. Someone had carried her voice, her exhaustion, her grief, onto a global stage. That same night, thousands of healthcare workers across Africa posted the same phrase. He spoke for me. In the debate room, no one clapped. There was no need. This wasn't entertainment. This was remembrance. And every second, Traoré stood there, calm, quiet, resolute. The world remembered what it had tried to forget, that Africa never lacked heroes. It only lacked microphones. The moderator signaled it was time to end. One final question remained, but something strange happened. The audience didn't want it to end. No one moved, not even the security guards. The air in the studio had changed. One reporter whispered, "Why does it feel like we've all been holding our breath for 400 years? Traoré stepped forward, mic still in hand. He hadn't used notes. He hadn't rehearsed. This moment wasn't built for him, but he had claimed it anyway. "This microphone," he said, holding it gently, "was not made for voices like mine. But today, it spoke." He turned to the audience, not to shame, not to beg, but to remind. He looked back at Trump, who had gone completely still. Leadership is not how loud you speak. It's how many people cry when you finally speak the truth. Silence. The moderator's hand trembled as she reached to close the debate. But the cameras kept rolling. Because deep down, everyone knew. History was happening. Outside the studio, protests had turned into vigils. Candles lit in Johannesburg, flags raised in Senegal, children watching on phones in Nairobi, Accra, Kampala, Bamako, and in America. A woman who once doubted him posted a tearful video. "I didn't even know where Burkina Faso was, but now I want to go there and say thank you." Inside, as the cameras began to dim, Traoré took one final step forward. "They told me I was too young. They said my country was too small, that this stage was too big for an African soldier." He raised his chin. "But today this stage became a bridge. And maybe, just maybe, we won't burn it this time." Trump stayed silent, but his supporters no longer jeered. Some even nodded, not because they agreed with everything, but because they had finally seen something real. And for once, real was more powerful than scripted. That night, millions of people didn't sleep, not from fear, but from a strange, swelling feeling deep in the chest. Hope. Back in Burkina Faso, the power had cut. Generators roared to life. A crowd huddled around a single outdoor screen running on backup fuel. They saw Traoré take a step back, then bow his head. The crowd wept. Elderly women ululated. Young men placed hands over their hearts. Children cried, not fully understanding, but knowing something big had happened. In that moment, across borders, across languages, across pain, the world felt one thing: respect. No victory music played, no grand announcement was needed. The moment was felt, not spoken. A boy in Detroit, a girl in Lagos, a grandmother in Haiti, all whispered the same thing that night. He spoke for us, and the clip went viral. In just 4 hours, it hit 100 million views. But more importantly, it hit souls. He didn't win a debate. He shifted the world. If this story made you feel something, if it made you cry, pause, or just see Africa differently, don't just scroll. Subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. Like, if Traoré earned your respect. Comment below. What moment hit you the hardest? Your voice matters. Let's build something powerful. Together.